tonight we're going to be informed by both Dan Aldrich and Ward regarding the flood. You'll remember that there are three judgments that come after the creation. And last week, Dave talked about the fall. And you'll remember that the fall impacted the entire universe. So the stars, everything are burning out. We're all burning out now because of the sin of Adam and Eve. And it ties into the second law. Creation was the first law of science. The second law of science of entropy, disorder, came from the fall. Tonight we're going to have the flood, which is the second judgment that God had to bring about because of our sin. And you'll notice that it narrows down to the earth. And the earth is going to be judged and everything on it. And what we had in the creation up to the flood is no more. So it wasn't like this. It was probably better than what we have right now. So anyway, I'll let them talk about that. Dan, are you ready to roll?
I believe I am.
And you got your button here. And you're going to get some fossils at halftime.
We will. If you're here tonight, which you are, free tonight, only tonight, you will take home a fossil. So there will be passing these boxes of fossils, and we want you all to have at least the one really good one. And if you're a kid, get a couple of them. You're going to need it.
Yes.
You go down to the stand here. What would you say? Anybody under the age of 30? How about that? All right. Yeah, you get it back there. You get it back there. I'll tell you that. Okay. And I could introduce, but I'm not. We're not going to do it. So the flood. We had the fall, and we had the separation from God. We have a reference to Jesus at the fall, by the way, too, which is fascinating that there would be this one who would step on Satan but be injured by it. Who's coming later, we'll talk about him later. But now we're to the flood. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the flood's fact or fiction? Why do you think it's fact? Because it's in the Bible. That's a really good answer. That's a great answer. Usually, like I said, the people that come to me are the people that pay attention in Sunday school, or you wouldn't be here probably. Or you're a denier, and you're just like, well, I just want to see evidence. Okay, well, we have some of those people sometimes. But I think by the end of this, you will say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much evidence there was that the Bible is absolutely correct and true in all that it says. We're going to have a lot of video in this presentation. We're going to have a lot of probably some interesting points for you that may be new to you, and hopefully a little good discussion. And we'll give these fossils away. We'll also play a little game with them at halftime. So, fact or fiction? Let's go with this first.
To some, the idea of Noah's flood conjures up images from Sunday school Bible stories of a small boat overstuffed with cute animals that gently bobbed in an ocean for 40 days. Many simply call it a myth. Fewer and fewer these days believe the flood account from Genesis 6 to 9 is actual history. The Bible frames the flood as an actual historical event, one that involved a specific family of 8. Genesis says the flood lasted for a full year, engulfed the entire world, and preserved animals, plants, and humanity from well-deserved judgment. The flood represents the most detailed account of any single event in the Bible. Both the Apostle Peter and Jesus even referred to the Genesis flood as a real historical event. So it's safe to say that the credibility of the Bible, and even Jesus himself, hinges on whether the flood account actually happened as described in Genesis.
Okay, if that's the case, then what do you think that the materialist worldview would be one of the main things from Genesis they would attack? It's going to be the flood, because it's covered in 88 verses of the Bible. It's also got a bunch of specifics, dates, times, and instructions, and multiple chapters in Genesis dedicated to it. So you can bet it's going to be under attack. But we need to understand the science behind this as well. You give a really great description of why we believe this, that it can be backed up scientifically as well as biblically. So we're going to look at what it was like before the flood. We're going to look at what Noah and his family did for about 100 years to get ready for it. And then we'll look at the sequence of the flood. flooding and how these events took place, these catastrophic events and how they took place. And then we're going to take a break, and you guys are going to get fossils, and we're going to learn a little bit about those, and we're going to talk about that evidence and the observational science involved in that, and we're going to come to a conclusion. By the end, I'm hoping you will really have a keen idea of why the flood absolutely happened, and all the evidences that are just, it's undeniable. So hopefully you'll come to that tonight. It'll be a faith builder for you, or a challenge to you if you're not a believer and you're here. But I think it's just a fascinating study of these chapters in Genesis. So we looked at the beginning at this pre-flood world, and we said that we had one landmass, and that's what we see when we look at tectonic plates today. We see that the continents are made up of what looked to be a single landmass that was broken up. So let's look at Genesis 1:9. God said, "Let the waters under heaven be gathered into one place. Let the dry land appear," and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together He called the seas, and God saw it was good. So we have, the Bible says there was a single landmass. The science tells us there was a single landmass. The high hills, the word used in these early chapters of the Bible is different than the word mountains, which is used in Psalm 104, where the mountains are pushed up and the valleys sink down. So we know that this is probably a lower, low-lying hills and landmass, no really high, what we would call mountains. Maybe a few thousand feet in the air at the most, but certainly no Mount Everest and things like this. What else do we know? Well, we can look at the coal beds, and we see in the coal beds that we've lost 97% of all the flora and fauna. All we have today on the earth, if you compare that to the compression of the coal seams, is about 3% of the vegetation that must have been here. And I want you to think about that for a minute. You know how much vegetation we have on the earth. Well, we're down to 3% of what was probably there if you look at what's buried and pressed into coal. U.S. Department of Geological Services, these guys, they did a study. Of course, they're using long, deep time things, but they're saying, you know what? There was a time when we saw this oxygen in amber fossils and specimens reach 30% or better. And then all of a sudden something happened, and it dropped down and bounced around and landed about 20%. So before the flood, there was certainly a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere, a lot more pressure, a lot more moisture in the atmosphere as well. We know that because we have insects that were able to grow to 3-foot wingspans like dragonflies, things like this. So if you take a sample of amber, so here's a really big piece of Indonesian amber. You can't actually see through it if you try. But these other ones that are up here, you can look at on the right. You can look. You see the little air bubbles in them. Well, they've extracted these air bubbles out and found, my goodness, there was a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere in the past. So a lot more oxygen. What do plants make? Oxygen. So if you have a lot more plants, you probably have a lot more oxygen anyway. You got a lot more air pressure. You've got the waters above the canopy and or the water, the extreme vapor increase that we would have had air pressure. And we had a single land mass. And we had relatively low-lying hills and no what we would call like a Mount Everest. So that's what the world was like. So let's look a little bit more at this.
According to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was a lush paradise, one that was set up for eternal life, worldwide vegetarianism, and harmony with our Creator. There was no bloodshed, disease, or even death. Plants and trees had no thorns or thistles, and humans tended God's creation. Then came the fall. We disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. Sin entered the world, and death through sin. Suffering, pain, mutations, and cancer now plagued humanity. Plants and trees grew thorns, and we transitioned from keepers of a lush garden to laboring farmers. The earth and universe began to decay and groan under the weight of sin's curse. Not even 2,000 years later, humanity had turned so corrupt that God sent the flood as a judgment against us. For God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
I find this really interesting, because Jesus is later going to say, as it was in the days of Noah, that's how it's going to be at the end. And there's this mark of the earth at this time in Noah's day, when he had to wipe it clean and basically go back to Genesis chapter 1 when we had a water wall. Remember that? He's taking it back to the studs. And so he says, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. All the flesh was corrupted. All the ways that men were on the earth were corrupted. God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. And again, he says this again. You know, when he says something, we pay attention. When he says something twice or three times, pay careful attention. He's saying the earth was full of this violence, unnecessary killing and violence. Because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them, the people committing all this, with all the earth. What's the world like today? And I mean, I'm not as old as some that are here, but I can tell you, I've never really seen it quite like this. I mean, it's crazy. The death, not just from the abortions and other things, but I'm talking about in the world in general, just senseless killing and violence, shootings, all kinds of crazy things. This is what the world was like in the days of Noah. So he tells Noah, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to give you some specific instructions. And if you're an engineer, you're going to really like this stuff. So he says, even if you're not, you should really do this. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Now, we don't really know. We have no idea what gopher wood is. We think it probably was more like a cedar or a cypress tree. But all we know is that's what he told his sons to do. Go for wood. So therefore, that's what we say. So you shall make the ark with roofs and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark is going to be 300 cubits, 300 by 50 by a height of 30. So we have a ratio of 300 to 50 to 30. You can use the ancient cubit of that day would have been probably about 20.2 or 3 inches. The more modern Hebrew cubit, 18 inches. But this time frame, probably more like the 20.3 Egyptian or ancient cubit. But the bottom line is this thing is 300 by 50 by 30. So, when you look at this ratio, you're going to find something really cool. So the Korean PhD marine engineer from Michigan, who's not a believer, said, looking at this is pretty crazy, but if I design a ship that I'm looking for maximum stability, maximum strength, and maximum comfort, not getting thrown all over the place, I'm looking for something in these dimensions. And it falls right in this same zone. In fact, it's what our cargo ships are designed to do today. They're built the same way. What's the difference between these cargo ships and Noah's Ark? Noah's Ark didn't have to go anywhere. It's just floating around. So it's probably may or may not have been curved or set up to move forward or backward because it's just made to survive. Ark just means a chest. The other thing that's fascinating and is typically used as an argument from science that, this thing couldn't have survived out into the deep waters if there were these reoccurring tsunamis every hour during all these earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and the fountains of the deep and whatnot. But what you find is the deeper the water is out here, when you start having these tsunamis, the more gentle the waves are. Actually, when you're at deep sea, maybe 8 to 10 foot, maybe 12-foot waves is all you're going to see in a large tsunami. It's only when you get closer to the shoreline, where the water is more shallow. It's like a tub, right? I mean, if you're in a pool, it doesn't really bother you, but if you're in a kitchen sink, you're going to really feel the impact of waves. And we're going to show you a little video evidence of something here just recently. But I think this is fascinating. So the British designed their HMS Dreadnought because they were looking for a battleship, really, that was going to lob rounds, more so like an artillery ship. It's going to lob rounds inland, and they wanted something very stable to do this. Well, the Dreadnought class of battleships was designed almost to the exact specifications of Noah's Ark. The engineers designed it to be this way because it was stable, it was comfortable with the young, it wasn't getting thrown around, and they had this ability to handle a lot of weight and do what they needed to do with it. So this design became a whole class of battleships. Gee, Noah wasn't just sitting in the desert, writing down the accounts of Genesis by chance, is what we're saying. So here we have the recent tsunamis off of Japan, and we have the Japanese Coast Guard, and they're out near the epicenter of the ocean, and here comes a tsunami. And they're thinking, oh my gosh, they're secular scientists and whatnot, they're thinking, oh my gosh, these tsunami waves, we're just going to get trashed. Our boats can be toast. So they're out near the epicenter when this happens. But listen to their reaction. You hear this first, oh my gosh, we're going to get it. And then they realize these waves are probably maybe 8, 10, 12 feet high, whatever. It's not that big a deal. And they go, okay. But check this out. It's really kind of entertaining. But this is an actual observational science against that mindset here. Hey, wait. It's like a band. Hold on here. They kind of have like survivor euphoria there. It's like, hey, wait, this isn't going to, just capsize us. So, no, that's exactly the effect that we would have expected. And for the ark, the encounter that we have and all of these demonstrations we have, yeah, you can handle these waves pretty easily, even tsunami type waves when you're in deeper water. So here we're going to talk about Chuck Missler, who spent his time doing some naval work in engineering, and he's going to talk about this design and the stability of the ark as well.
Dimensions, whether cubits or feet, doesn't matter. We know that it's 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits deep, and let's assume it's carrying weight that lets it have about, let's say, a 15 cubit draft, okay? Now, of course, its weight is concentrated in its center of gravity, which would be in the middle. It has a weight coming down, and it's got a buoyancy that's going up that's equal. That's why it sits in the water. It's balanced in its equilibrium. Let's assume it tips over from wind or waves and so forth. Gravity is pulling down through its center of gravity, but the water that is displaced is pushing up at it, and as the buoyancy. But you'll notice that it's going to have the center of buoyancy will be at the centroid of the triangle. If I knock over about 30 degrees, center of the triangle, the centroid of the triangle is offset from the gravity. So this forms a couple tending to straighten it out. You follow me? Because the upward pressure is attempting to move it counterclockwise in the diagram. Follow me? So, and they're equal, of course, but it's what's called a couple at the moment. And it turns out this particular design, as long as the center, the vector of buoyancy is above the center of gravity, it's stable. It'll right itself. And this particular design can virtually go almost to 90 degrees without tipping over. It's incredibly stable proportions. And so either, anyway, it's interesting that, it's no surprise, of course, that God knew what he was doing. And so, but I mention that because these things, what I'm sparing you, by the way, is the narratives of the flood accounts in virtually every ancient culture. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, you name it, they all have their myths. And they're all alike. How the earth was flooded, and God appointed this one guy to build a boat and save his family and the animals. That story, in its essence, is embodied in the legends of every ancient culture. But on the one hand, there are points of similarity that are fascinating. The doves and the raven being examples. There's some elements of the stories that are very similar. On the other hand, they're so fanciful, they're absurd. What's interesting about the biblical account, obviously it's the true one, but it is that the proportions are rational and stood up to scientific scrutiny.
So, I don't know how many of you guys know about the tale of Gilgamesh, right? So we're like in the Mesopotamia area. So his ark was a cube. Good luck riding around in that thing for a year, right? You're like a bobber, right? You imagine. But the design that is given to us in the Bible is just incredibly accurate. What we would expect if somebody knew what they were talking about and said, this is what I need you to build so that you can survive this. Now, we get to the part where the animals come in. Well, how the heck do you fit all these animals on this ark? It wouldn't be big enough for all the animals, right? Well, Lord, you get to talk to this ark for us, our animal expert. And there, he got your attention with that walking in front of that figure.
Very good, thank you. All right, thank you, Dan, for introducing us to the topic of the feasibility of the ark and having it shown us how it's built and how the dimensions that God asked Noah to construct the ark. I'll learn my range here pretty soon. So kind of like a dog learning its new electric fence. So the ark is an example of the kind of phrase I used in one of the first two sessions, is that in our course we're wanting to show how science is catching up with Scripture. And so this is an example of shipbuilding science is shown to catch up with Scripture because it fits the same ratio dimensions that was used, that God gave Noah to use, and it's been used in boats nowadays, the dreadnought. So now I'm going to go ahead and take that a little bit further and talk about the feasibility of this great big ship. Will it be able to carry the animals and people to be able to save and to have a remnant to come back and then to repopulate the earth later on? So that's going to be the subject or the topic of which we're going to be talking about now. Before we do that, I'm going to try to get close to this speaker. But there's some things up here that you can look at later on. Dan has some examples of fossils. I have some books up here. Here's a book, the feasibility study by John Woodbaraki, from ICR, Institute for Creation Research. So there's there are some of the things which we gather from this particular book, but it's the feasibility of being able to put the animals on the ark and for it to function and everything to that respect. A couple of other examples of references from Answers in Genesis. They are talking about how they're determining which animals were necessary to go onto the ark. And so they're going to be doing studies on that. So there's actually a full study discipline called baraminology. And baramin means created kinds. So baraminology is a study of created kinds. And so they are the ones which got together a whole committee of them to determine which animals were necessary to be on the ark, to have the animals to repopulate all that we see across the world today. So there's that as well. Also, the other thing which you'll find up here, you're welcome to come and get some outlines. And these are outlines which have been put together that are a little bit different than our discussion. So those of you who like outlines of paper, you'll be satisfied in that respect. So now, how many of you grew up on a farm? Good number. I grew up on a farm, and part of our farm life was to be able to transport our livestock. It might be one head of livestock, or it might be several head of livestock. So if you plan ahead and whatever you're doing, say if you're taking cattle to a livestock show, you're going to be loading up the planning ahead of time. You're going to make sure you're going to be able to haul them. You're going to make sure you have all your show equipment, feed, all those type of things to take along, and transportation. So you just plan ahead. Now that's basically what Noah's doing. He had 100 to 120 years to plan and to make this happen. But this chart right here, there's a lot of information on this. And if any of you been to the Ark Encounter, which I'm sure several of you have, you might have seen this chart. And if you didn't get any publications there that have the chart, you can probably look it up online, and I think this chart will still be there. But the reason why we have this chart is to talk about the feasibility of the Ark capacity. And we're going to come back and just quickly review the kinds. Only took a male and a female of a sheep kind to produce and have all of the sheep, all the different types of breeds and sheep that we see today. There's not as much variability in the sheep as there would be in, say, the feline kind. So only took 2 feline kind to go on the Ark to have the genetic capability to produce all of the different feline kinds that we see today, from lions to tigers down to our our cats, or domestic house cats, or our alley cats. So only took 2. 2 canine kinds going on the Ark produced all different types of canines, from wolf to chihuahua. So that genetic variability was in the 2 kinds of which went on the Ark. So therefore, you don't have to have a representative of every type or species of canine type of animal to go onto the Ark. So it can decrease that number quite a bit. And this gives the total number of kinds, in which is estimated from the baraminologists at Entrance in Genesis. About 1,400 total kinds would be necessary to go in the Ark and to come off the Ark. Which then they calculated about 7,000 total number of animals on the Ark. So the question is, can we be able to get a total of about 7,000 animals on the Ark, their food, and be able to sustain them for a year on this boat ride? So that is something which here we are today, and we believe in the flood account, we believe in the Ark, and so therefore we as believers would say yes, that worked. And like Dan said, the flood account is the skeptics. There's one thing which the naysayers will point to is that no way a flood could have happened on the earth, and that's a myth. It didn't take place. The other thing, the other stumbling block is they say, how are you going to get all these animals that we see out there onto this one boat? And it's just can't be done. And you hear commonly say, well, how are you going to get that great big 100,000 pound dinosaur or two of them on the ark. That's gonna take up a lot of room. So, so quickly, you will be able to tell them and say, you don't have to take an adult, a full-grown adult. You take a smaller one, you take a juvenile. The areas here, over here, is going to be, you probably can't read this, but I'll just point out up here at the top, this is going to be mammals, up here. Birds, here at 284. This is going to represent our amphibians, 248 total kinds of amphibians, and reptiles, and synapsids. So there are, so this shows, this chart, not to go into all the nitty gritty with it, but it does have on there indications of clean animals that could be in each of these different areas. It has indications of their, which ones are, if they have an opening in them, if they aren't completely filled in, that means they're going to be extinct. Today, they went on the ark, came off the ark, but today they're extinct. And that's going to be, this chart is going to show all those types of things here. So extinct numbers, going to show the clean of a particular kind, and it's going to also show the ones which are existing and surviving today. So all that's on the chart. The thing to, to say is essentially up here with mammals, it's estimated that about 70% of these mammals, of the total 468 kinds of mammals that went on the ark, 70% are extinct. They're no more. So not all of them are that high. Birds are about 20%. Amphibians are about, birds are about 30%. Amphibians are about 20%. Reptiles are about 70%, again, and dinosaurs be in that area. It's estimated that in the reptile area, the dinosaurs, different references say probably 50 to 80 kinds of dinosaurs are represented by this reptile area. And this down here, synapsids, totally 100% are extinct. And synapsids are animals that are seen in the fossil record, but not a lot is known about them. They're essentially called non-mammalian, so not really have all the evidences of a reptile. They don't seem to have scales, but they don't seem to be mammals as well. Anyway, they're totally, this kind is totally extinct, and they've included that. They've looked at the fossil record and everything, included synapsids into this particular ark capacity idea. All of that basically is to, we just want to come back and just know that this number here is about 7,000 total number of animals. That is a feasibility of being able to get that amount of animals on the ark. The size, we put a representative of a sheep up here, because the average size of the animal, it's estimated, is probably about 120 pounds, about the size of a full-grown adult sheep, on average. Now, that would be, some are going to be pocket pets, or very small, others are going to be larger than this, but on average, 120 pounds. If we use that size of an animal, then that would give us an idea, due to the amount of capacity, 1.88 million cubic feet of capacity within the ark. And any of you have been there, you know it's huge, and that's something which that we try to put it into something that we could relate to and see on a regular basis. An example that's been used is 450 semi-trailers. This brown portion would be the capacity of the ark. 450 semi-trailers would, if you park on the front bumper or the rear bumper, is a 6-mile long string of tractor trailers with their, with the trailer on. So it's a large number. If you recall in Kevin's talk, he used the number 550 rail cars, box cars, was the estimated number that he used as a capacity. So, nonetheless, about 2 million cubic feet capacity in the yard. And each one of these trailers, if they were put sheep on them, if we had 450 of those, then the ark could be able to hold, just as we're going to be transporting sheep like across the state from one farm to the other farm, it could hold 112,500 sheep. So, yes, I think we could probably get 7,000 of various animals on the ark and then have special enclosures and environments for them as well. So, it's huge. If you haven't ever been to the Ark Encounter, we would highly recommend it. And, go and see it. It would be a huge blessing to you to experience that. So those are the 450 tractor trailers there. The other thing is that the capacity, we think that we could be able to, the ark would be able to hold the animals and be able to hold the food that is going on there as well. And even Noah, with his preaching and his efforts, it still ended up just being 8 people going on the ark anyway. Now, this is another travel question. Who has been to the Dinosaur National Monument? Yeah, a few of you have. That is it's right on the border of Colorado and Utah. And it is north of I-70, probably 2 to 3 hours. Is that about right? So I haven't been there myself, but it is a place where there is buried, and where there's been flows and rock has been formed, where there's a tremendous number of fossils of animals that are within this one area. There are dinosaurs within the fossils there, T-Rex and those fossils, and then also common day creatures that we see nowadays, such as turtles, amphibians, frogs, for example, possums. So the idea that trying to be persuading us from the secular sciences is that dinosaurs, reptile dinosaurs, did not exist at the same time as mammals. And to say that those didn't exist at the same time makes it very difficult when they are in the same fossil bed to accept as a fact. So that is something, if you ever have the chance to go to the Dinosaur National Monument, those folks have been there, said it's a great place to go. And so I hope to be there, go there someday as well. This is an example of a fossilized mammal. Estimated to be probably essentially the size of a raccoon or something like that. But in it, it is to have they've identified it as a dinosaur that it had eaten. So a mammal eating dinosaurs existed at the same time, I would say. So the other thought is then, how do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? We're going to see a video here in a little bit. Those of you who were here the other night for Kevin Meyer's dinosaur presentation saw that there's how dinosaurs fit in the Bible. And then also, what would have been the name that if Noah was counting the creatures going up into the ark, and the ones we call dinosaurs now, what might have been the possible name or description that we used at that time? Dragons, yeah. So we don't know for sure. That's possible. But the word dinosaur is not coined the 1800s. So, all right, let's see what this has.
Evolution holds that dinosaurs evolved 220 million years ago and died about 65 million years ago from any of a number of possible extinction events. But the Bible teaches that all land animals, including dinosaurs, were created on the sixth day of creation, just thousands of years ago, and they were all named by Adam just before God handed over his completed creation to Adam and Eve, charging them to take dominion over his completed creation. Then, about 4,400 years ago, the entire world was deluged by Noah's flood, and the dinosaurs, along with billions of other creatures, were wiped out. Let's take a quick look at some evidences that show that the biblical account might actually be true. First, dinosaurs are cleverly designed. Consider this Triceratops. Its 2,000-pound head is mounted in a way that allows it to turn every which way, yet still be strong enough to ram something, even while running. What about massive sauropods with weight-bearing systems from hip to toe that allow its 200,000-pound body to even walk, and neck vertebrae that are 90% filled with air so it can lift up its head? Next, there's the absence of dinosaur ancestors and transitions. Even the Chicago Field Museum sign admits there have been 0 transitions between dinosaur kinds. It shows question marks regarding where they came from. It's almost like someone just put each basic kind on Earth right at the same time. There are even dinosaur design features that show they lived in the ideal pre-flood world. Sauropods can exceed 200,000 pounds, yet they have tiny nostrils for breathing. Pterodactyls may have been too heavy to fly in today's atmosphere. Same with huge pre-flood dragonflies. The fossil record is filled with giant creatures and plants. We know this because there are billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And when we look at the dinosaur fossil record, we see that they were buried furiously, rapidly, and simultaneously, oftentimes found fleeing in groups. Take this massive bone bed in Hilda, Canada. Thousands of centrosaurs were catastrophically buried over an entire square mile. Or this one in China, where thousands of different kinds of dinosaurs were simultaneously buried in a single 980-foot-long ravine. There are hundreds of dinosaur bone beds all over the world, including the U.S., where the Morrison Formation covers 13 states and 700,000 square miles. Thousands of torn-apart dinosaurs are buried here in hundreds of mass graves, with many found in the classic death pose with their necks arched back, choking as they die. Museum signs everywhere even admit they died in a watery catastrophe. Some dinosaurs are even found mummified, with tree leaves, flowers, ferns, shrubs, and algae still in their stomach. Dinosaurs are even found buried with marine creatures. Isn't a global flood the best explanation for this? Scientists have been discovering soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Just in the last 20 years, over 50 articles have been published in scientific journals that have documented 14 bioorganic materials in dinosaur bones that simply cannot be millions of years old. These include blood vessels, red blood cells, hemoglobin, bone cells, ovalbumin, chitin. Many dinosaur bones were even found unfossilized in places like Madagascar, Alaska, and Montana. Collagen, which has a maximum shelf life of about 900,000 years at 40 degrees. With a maximum shelf life of less than 1 million years, what's collagen doing in dinosaur bones that are supposedly 65 million years old? Limited DNA, skin pigments, fixed proteins, histones, keratin, and elastin. Just 20 years ago, most scientists simply assumed dinosaur bones were solid mineralized impressions of bones. But modern science has now revealed that many of the dinosaur bones are original, even at the molecular level.
Science is catching up with the scriptures. So remember that, be equipped with that idea if you're talking to others which are skeptical about this as well. And you'll have examples and reasons to say that particular phrase. And the one thing there are many things to get out of this, but this is indicating soft tissue is found in those dinosaur fossils. The ones that are said to be 65 million years ago or more, they're finding soft tissue in there. Which the thought is that, even in the most ideal conditions, that collagen could only last 900,000 years in a fossil before it would be completely mineralized in there. So, soft tissue found in dinosaur fossils is inconsistent with with tens of millions of years, like 65 million years is that's the number thrown out there often by the secular science, that is when dinosaurs would have gone extinct. So keep that in mind. Some artifacts that have been found over the years that have been made by humans, and then these artifacts that contain things which look like they would be representing a dinosaur. And there's several different types of these things in which have been found over the years and discovered. Cambodia, Angkor Wat, I believe it's the Angkor Wat is the area, ruins, the area there which this is seen on a relief, and it looks like a Stegosaurus. So the artists at that time see this in as a fossil that was the artist had seen from some museum, stuff museum, and then he included this into some type of a relief or artwork on a wall. 12th century, probably not. So the artist probably actually saw that creature walking around. Mexico, 2500 BC. This is dated on this particular artifact here. Egypt, 3100 BC, with these depictions of animals on the shield, in which could be representative of dinosaurs. Utah, pictograph of looks like a dinosaur type of a pictograph that's considered to be 150 BC would be the dating on that. Ethiopia, 200 AD, looks like a hunting scene with hunters going out and they are hunting and killing this animal here that looks like it's a dinosaur. So artwork that's been done by people, which the implication is that the artist saw this, witnessed these type of things in the name. If you've been through the Ark, you probably recognize this type of a area here showing the different stalls, different holding areas, and things to that effect that you can see inside of the Ark. And also, if you've been there, the creatures which are represented being shown in those different holding areas, how they do not look like animals we'd expect to see today, but they're really the original kinds that are in the Ark that then would have had the ability to have the variability and to change into the animals in which we see nowadays running across, the wild animals or domestic animals have been changed quite a bit by the artificial selection and breeding, but the wild animals are going to be changing by the variability that is seen within the genetics, within the original two kinds that were in the Ark. This is basically the manifest in which Noah had to build the Ark. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind onto the Ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be made male and female, of the birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. So this is indicating that Noah did not have to go out and be a cowboy and round up all the creatures and put them onto the Ark. He didn't have to do that. God sent him. God divinely chose and selected the genetics, the behavior, and selected the individual animals that God wanted to go into the Ark that is going to then repopulate the earth after the flood. So, and those animals at that time, if you recall, were not afraid of people at that time. So God sent them and to keep them alive. So may have sent them all the day that they're going to be loading up. God may have sent them, weeks or months ahead of time and hang out in the area where they were building the Ark and finishing it up. We don't know, but God selected and sent the animals that He wanted on that Ark. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself. And it shall be for food for you and for them, for you and for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. At that time, animals were not supposed to be eating meat. So that would mean that if Noah and his family, and he wasn't supposed to be eating meat either, if he's eating grains and other, green leafy things or things along those lines, then he would not be eating meat and be omnivores, and the animals will all be omnivores at that point in time and be going onto the ark. And since they would not be ones of which would be wanting to kill or be to not, to kill to eat others, it would be a lot easier to have those particular. Instead, you didn't have the predator prey type there, and if you wouldn't run into the situation like happened in the veterinary clinic I was working in when I got out of veterinary school. And there was one doctor saw exotics, and another doctor saw exotics as well. But one saw mostly reptiles, the other saw mostly birds and little furry creatures. So we had an exotic ward where the cichlids were kept. And one morning, what came in was that the technician said, okay, Dr. Fitzgerald, good news, your patient ate. Dr. Smith, bad news, the snake ate your bird, or your bird patient. So you wouldn't have that issue on the ark that the animals getting out and then go in another cage and eat them or something like that. So the husbandry would be something in which they're selected behaviorally, and that you put them into a dark area, put them into a quiet, contained area, and the animals will oftentimes be more calmed down. So if you ever had a fractious cat, your own cat, or seen somebody with a fractious cat, if they can go into a box and then be covered, they'll oftentimes calm down more. So they're going to kind of a hibernation state or a calm state if they're going to be put into a smaller area than maybe the Rocky or the Ark and things like that would not make it pandemonium in the Ark. The other thing here is that with Noah and all, Noah to do all this was quite the skilled individual. Noah is not only a shipbuilder, building is busy, getting his boys are busy, or whoever helping building the largest ship known to man at the time. We assume it was the largest ship known to man at the time, but then he was doing that. Then planning on the animals being collected, planning on getting enough food, and preaching. Noah was also becoming quite the husbander of animals. So his animal husbandry was amazing to be able to know how to handle, care for 1,400 different kinds of animals that were going to be coming on the ark. It was also helpful for Noah to know that, and use that idea when the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat at the end. He used a raven and used doves to climb into the sea if it was going to be a good thing or feasible for Noah and the animals and his family to disembark the ark at that time. So he used it, knowing what their behaviors are. So, but probably the most important thing that Noah did on his daily checklist was to obey God, and that was something which he obeyed God. He went by what the plan that God gave Noah. You wonder, did Noah have to have contingency plans for this, or did he have to have a plan plan B or plan C, or did he have to worry about things along those lines? You know, about the animals coming or not, and was it going to be enough food and things to take it along. But I think Noah, every day on his checklist was right at the top was obey God, and if he stayed with that, to me he stayed with plan G, plan capital G. You start with plan capital G and stay with plan capital G. We usually don't have to go through all of our human plans of A, B, C, D, E, F, failure, you know, that type of thing. We don't have to do that. So we, if we follow what, how Noah prepared, and keep in mind what Noah was doing, he was just obeying God. Was all, you know, all he was doing. Making a further comment about the juvenile kinds being on the ark and taking the younger animals instead of the old big adults. The juvenile kinds will occupy far less space regardless of the kind. They'll sleep more. They're too young to procreate at that time, perhaps. You know, that's one of the thoughts that's provided. And they will take less water, less food, and there will be less waste as well. So with that information, I hope that has equipped you with and given you an understanding of how the ark, as represented in the Bible, is a feasible undertaking to do what it says occurred in the Bible. So, thank you very much for listening.
All right. So we're all prepared. You think we could fit all the animals on the ark?
Sure.
Not even a question. Especially the more we know about genetics, the more variation we know we can get from a single kind. A kind, if you were here for the evolution presentation, a good way to think of a kind is a pair of kind is a male and female that can procreate and have children that they themselves can procreate. And that's why you can marry somebody on the other side of the earth and have children, and they can have children, and they can have children, because you're all the same kind. You're all humankind. The whole race thing is a silly thing. Look at this example, and you can see how we've got all these animals here. But now we're ready for something. And we have the exact date and time on which he says, okay, the flood's going to come. But notice that Noah's preaching this righteousness and his example of obedience has gone on for 100 years. You know how you worry about your neighbor next door, like, oh man, I pray for that dude, or whatever, right? He's having to deal with this for 100 years, and there's no indication anybody else wanted anything to do with it, except for him and his family. And so now we're going to see what happens here with the specifics on date and time and how this takes place. And we're going to start looking at the flood deeply here.
600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. These two events, the fountains of the great deep breaking up and the windows of heaven opening, began the first day of a 371-day-long calamity that resurfaced the earth and killed everything that moved on land. Hot magma mixed with steam pierced the earth's crust. Giant rifts or tears ran thousands of miles across the planet. Scalding hot magma vaporized massive amounts of water that jetted into the atmosphere. The water fell back to Earth as intense global rain, along with torrential rain from heaven for 40 days. Worldwide catastrophic rifting caused massive mud-filled tsunamis to speed across deep ocean floors, then on the shallow ocean floors, killing everything in their path. The first mega sequence wipes out mostly shallow marine habitats. The bursting fountains of the great deep spew out megatons of magma and carbon dioxide. Sure enough, the first mega sequence rocks show a spike in volcanic activity and massive amounts of carbon dioxide. During these first 40 days, intense water currents overtopped most of the flooded continents. Water-laden sediment travels at highway speeds. Thick sediment blankets start covering low regions of the continent. Fossils show that the first three mega sequences buried the shallow seas that were filled with marine life as these deposits have almost no trees or land animals. All three mega sequences covered similar environments across North and South America and Africa, the three continents mapped so far. One global cause, Noah's flood, best explains this one worldwide effect. Then by the 40th day of the flood, the Absorica megasequence began hitting. The map showed that this is when things got much worse. Something shoves the water over the tops of even the high lands from that ancient world. The newly forming ocean floor offshore is so hot that it starts very thick, pushing up the ocean waters from beneath. Sea level rises dramatically. Molten magma rises and fills the widening gaps, pushing the mid-ocean ridges wider. The hot ocean floor shoves against the continents, and then slides beneath them, like giant conveyor belts, deep beneath the earth in some places. Rather than the conventional model that has the seafloor spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour, due to the heat caused by the friction and pressure of the rapidly subducting plates. As the diving ocean plates subduct under the land, they push down the continental edges and then release them, creating tsunami cycles that blanket the continents. Just how tsunamis happen today, only more intense and frequent. For example, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, and the fourth largest in history, was a magnitude 9.1 earthquake that occurred in 2011. This earthquake was caused by an undersea megathrust about 45 miles east of the Japanese coast. At the center, there was a 160-foot slip between the overriding plate that was part of Japan and the underlying Pacific plate. The sea bottom rose about 23 feet when the fault unlocked, and the resulting earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami that was 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland for 6 miles. The tsunamis occurring during the flood, however, were different, much different. With the ocean ridge bursting open rapidly and pushing the ocean floor under land continents on a worldwide scale, tsunamis were happening in cycles, several every hour, and with long stretches of subduction zones active at the same time. The incoming phase of a tsunami has a much higher speed and is highly turbulent, which keeps the sediment in suspension, but it leaves behind layers of sediment as it slows down in the retreating phase. This cycle repeats several times every hour during the 150-day inundation stage of the flood, first entombing the shallow marine life, followed by land creatures in different habitats and elevations, leaving behind what we see today in the fossil record. These types of tsunamis have even occurred in recent history, such as the tsunami caused by slipping ocean plates that hit the coast of Washington in 1700 and left behind multiple layers representing each wave of the tsunami. Recent seismic technology actually allows us to investigate whether this type of rapid subduction occurred. Sure enough, these scans reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle, beneath the subduction zones that surround the Pacific Ocean. The severity and elevation of this stage of the flood is why the first land creatures and plants start showing up in the fossil record laid down by the Absorica megasequence. Entire ecosystems are buried in enormous deposits that later turn into coal, such as the extensive Appalachian coal beds. In fact, the U.S. has over 7 trillion tons of coal reserves. Where did it all come from? While we know that coal is formed by dead plant material being sandwiched between sediment layers, we only have enough vegetation on the Earth's surface today to produce just a fraction of the existing coal reserves. This shows that the pre-flood world was mostly covered by lush vegetation. The rising floodwaters and tsunamis that were necessary to sweep over the land and bury vast amounts of vegetation that turned into coal are best explained by a catastrophe of worldwide proportions.
You know, when we look at the fossil record, if you were like me, you were a materialist or an evolutionist, you see all these, you know, kind of what you thought were more primitive animals buried subsequently ahead of mammals because, yeah, we evolved or something. No, that's just the order they died in, okay? So the guys that lived, that were shoaling animals, like horseshoe crabs or trilobites, these types of things, well, they got killed first, so they got buried first. That's pretty much what we see, and one of the problems that I didn't realize at the time, that we know now, is like these compound eyes and trilobites that have, 10 different functions are one of the most complex eyes in nature, yet they're in the Cambrian. And there's nothing below them but granite. So That doesn't work. So this explains a lot of things to a person who's coming out of that evolutionary mindset, to me anyway. But what's fascinating is they gave them these layers of catastrophe, or rock layers and sandstones and limestones and whatnot. These names, which are Native American type names and whatnot. But what we see when we look at these layers on all these different continents is something that matches up beautifully with how we're told the flood took place. We first had a bursting of these deep sea fountains of the deep. We had this torrential downpour from the heavens above dropping. We see the tsunamis from the crust falling apart and the seafloor being created. By the way, when you create a new seafloor, and the seafloor is really young, very few meteors in it, nothing like that. It's obviously, not a very old seafloor, and there's hardly any sediments on it comparatively. What's cool is, as these volcanoes are going off and this new seafloor is being created continually here, it's very hot, and so it kind of acts like a beach ball. So like if you push a beach ball underwater, it's kind of hard to keep it underwater, isn't it? Because it's pushing up all the time. So these seafloors are rising up, and the sea levels are being pushed up and over the continents. There are types of sandstone, like Coconino, that we had in Arizona where I grew up, or that go all the way up north and up into Wyoming. These types of sandstone. It takes 50 feet of sand, intense water with a lot of sand in it, a lot of composition sand in it. It takes 10 feet of that water, or actually 50 feet of that water, to get a single foot of sedimentary sandstone that's compressed down when you compress it down. Yes, it's much larger than it gets pushed down with pressure. So when we see 10-foot sandstone layers that have evidence of going back and forth, the crossing textures of this Coconino sandstone, 10 feet thick, and we know it takes 50 feet of water to produce one of these things, a foot of this. We're talking about waves that are over 500 feet high, pushing over the continent, intense catastrophe, and loaded up with this sand composite. So these are the layers we see in all the continents, and this is the sequence, just a little bit about the sequence, and we're very close to our break, so hang in there, just a couple minutes.
Join us now as we reveal how Noah's flood lines up with brand new scientific research. Over 1,800 oil well boreholes from 4 continents have all been compiled and mapped. The newly emerging map tracks the thickness and extent of each rock type as they were laid down by the flood. This research reveals the same 6 megasequences of sedimentary rock deposits across multiple continents. Each megasequence contains a huge stack of rock, often with coarse-grained sandstone on the bottom, then finer-grained deposits like shale, then topped by limestones. Each megasequence is bounded above and below by flat, eroded surfaces called unconformities. A few places on Earth have layers that represent all 6 megasequences. How did they get there? What do they say about Noah's flood? Catastrophically water-deposited sedimentary layers top most of the world's continents. Would Noah's flood bring lots of water and lots of mud? Geologists agree on the 6 megasequences, but they differ on the timescale in which they happened. If they took millions of years, then they have little to do with the flood. But if they were all deposited rapidly and recently, then the flood should come to mind.
So, we think this thing happened in a catastrophe. If you're a secular or materialist, a secular scientist, you say this stuff happened over really billions of years. All right? So tell me how the same sedimentary pancake layers are in Africa that are also here in the United States, and the same layers of sandstone that are in the Grand Canyon or in the Appalachians, or are in South America. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So we all know these things, and we all think we've all been schooled that this is millions and billions of years. that it appears to be more laid down in a catastrophe on a global scale. Now, we're at our break. Let's go. Okay, so, that deserves a hand, I think. Okay, so we're gonna take a break. You are gonna get fossils on this break, and when you come back, we will play a game with those, and we're gonna do observational science with the evidence in your hand. Get a really nice fossil when they hand them out. If you're a kid, 30 or under, or whatever, or you just want more than one, then get at least a couple of them, man, and get different ones. And you're gonna learn what those are and why it's important that you have these apologetics in your hand, okay? So let's take a break for how long, brother?
Yeah, we'll come back at 7:30.
Okay, are you gonna
16
hand out the
minutes.
fossils when they go or come, or an hour?
What?
You want them to have the fossils?
Well, we can take them downstairs and let them pick
Okay.
while they're eating, just so they don't eat them.
I know you're headed to the food, so let's go downstairs, have something to eat, get your fossils, and you say how long, Steve?
15 minutes, 16 minutes.
Take
7:30 we start again.
Take 16 minutes to 7:30. Go ahead, have fun and get a fossil.
Oh.
Make sure you get a couple.
That's a good. I'm pretty close to that age, so that's great. Like your analogy, we're going to use it as a step.
Are there?
It's pretty.
It is pretty. Just a great design, but beautiful. Beautiful.
I still have a nephew and a family out there. This animal, this ammonite, was caught in the Philippine Sea a few years ago. And this is the same animal that we find in the fossil record over 500 million years ago, mostly around Madagascar in this area. But they haven't, the problem is these things haven't changed.
Right.
And they haven't evolved that way. And they find these on the top of mountains.
Right.
So it's just so awesome. The evidence of what we would have expected to see.
And that's, if you're talking about living fossils, you'll be talking about later
It's
on.
coming up.
Yeah, so Dan will be talking about living fossils here.
These are all living fossils.
Shark tooth.
Yeah.
I have a shark tooth that I found in western Kansas, right next to the rattlesnake.
What's interesting about him is this is a 400 or 500 million year old supposedly shark's tooth, but it looks exactly like the same species of shark that we have today and the same tooth, so there's something wrong with it. This is really fascinating. You can't really appreciate it, but this is a it's this side. These are the tracks. These are the tracks of a trilobite. And you can kind of see them if you get a light on it. Yeah, put a light up here for these guys. I don't have my phone with me, but look at this.
What's the different kinds on the side?
You see,
Yeah, but birds are up there.
his tracks were found 400 million years after he went extinct.
Oh, looks like a sow bug.
This is Mississippian tracks of a trilobite, and the last trilobites we find in the Cambrian. So we got an issue, you know.
Is that a,
That's amber.
is it
That's
a
got a
bug
bug.
in the
By the
amber?
way, these flies you find and stuff like that, they're the same ones we have today. Same bark. The cool thing is this high oxygen level with these amber sands. Pretty cool. Here's one of my favorite fossils. You know what this is?
Poop.
It is. It's corpulite. It's dinosaur poop. How long do you think this would lay around and become fossil? And how would it possibly lay around long enough to be fossil?
Not during any rainstorm.
No, it'd have to be buried like now and then be fossil. So poop does not last very long. Therefore, it's a catastrophic event that secures its preservation there. This little fish here, oh, that's actually the actual trilobite that matches up with these tracks. They actually kind of do like this, they kind of pull themselves in.
Oh, these are two separate, or they have different covers on them.
Yeah,
They're
this
different,
is
I think. And then
amphibians
there's
and
like
reptiles.
Ward's outline on the flood. That he did.
Yeah, got some cool pictures.
Yeah.
That one's mammals and birds, okay?
Oh, is that the difference in them? Okay.
Yeah, mammal,
Okay.
and reptiles.
Yeah, but what if they're flooded?
They could have been floating on the water, there could have been, with all the vegetation, that has stopped and taken place, that you could have had a huge vegetation melt, a massive vegetation floating on the water. You could have had, trees together, things like that. We're, thinking of things like that. We don't know, it doesn't, the scripture doesn't say for sure,
Yeah,
but.
no, where the scientists have figured it out.
Yeah, yes, yes, so.
Okay, Sally.
How are you today? Yes. Yeah, I practiced with him.
Really, but my father was Hobart Smith,
Uh-huh.
and you used Fitzgerald Smith, and my father knew too.
Yeah. No, I didn't.
You weren't referring to my father?
No, I was not
Okay, but
referring
that was
to
a
your
nice.
father. Yeah, so yes, well, that was, yeah, I think the other doctors, it didn't pop my mind right at the time, but Kevin Fitzgerald.
The Shazar?
Huh?
The Shazar?
No?
No? Okay. Was it? Okay.
They, what's fascinating is like, they have an island that pops up in the Pacific, Volcanic Island. It doesn't take but a few weeks, and there's creatures living on it.
How's that happen?
Well,
It's isolated.
exactly.
What Darwin
Here's a
said.
really nice
So,
place.
yeah, that was one of the stories.
This is, oh, it's solid.
That's right, it's been fossilized.
It can happen with animals,
But that is the sea snail. They look exactly the same today as they did 500 million years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Those guys died alive.
Yeah, yeah, you can pick this one.
Those are yours.
And then
You can keep that.
things like this.
Yeah, this is exactly what we see
And
today
I
in the
have
Philippine Sea.
seen,
Ammonites.
Like the black, like onyx, and they have like just filled with fossils.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah.
this big rock was on display at this shop.
Yeah, look at the size of this ammonite.
Yeah. Aren't they pretty?
They are, but you know what? They're still alive and they still look exactly the same. You can see the pearl is still in them. That's supposed to be 500 million years old. He looks exactly the same when they're catching the Philippine Sea, and only he was on top of a mountain buried alive.
The snake was able
Isn't that great?
to force itself out
And then it's like, you know, when you see the shells, the outer part, is
Yeah,
so
this is the
rough,
story,
you
yeah.
know, kind of.
Yeah.
And then you turn it in, it's like this pearlescence and
Yeah,
everything.
there are
It's just a, I
the
think
ammonites,
that's
even in the world today, the ammonites are still surviving. Some of them have the ridged, that's a trilobite there.
yeah.
He's got the 10-part
You
compound
know,
eye.
they still, the kids have found some of these still in the ocean.
Oh, yeah. Well, they are very much related to a horseshoe crab. They have the same eye structure and everything, and they were found in the same record. This is what's fascinating. I stepped on a cable. This is what's fascinating. These tracks were found 300 million years after he was buried in the Cambrian, but those are his tracks. So there's another problem with the evolution. This is a Nysia fish from Wyoming. And he
Oh,
still
that's
even,
nice.
he's still even, you can see his fine bone structure. They even still have oil in them, and they're supposed to be hundreds of millions. What's an anchovy doing
So-
in Wyoming?
Is this set into here, or is this the actual piece of
That's
stone?
actual piece of
And then it
stone.
was,
They
sand was
carved it
brushed
out.
away?
Yeah, they knocked it out.
Oh, boy,
But
that'd
you
be
can see,
exciting.
you know, if you have a little fish die on the riverbank, he's not gonna be preserved like that. None of his bones or anything. It was rapid. That is amber, and that is a massive piece of amber.
Yeah. Okay.
And all of those have,
These are things you don't usually see.
yeah, but those are alive today. That's sea lilies. You can see the bark of the tree on that one. I love that one. See the bark of the tree? Because it's just tree sap. It's pine sap.
Oh.
So you can see it was just dripping down the pine tree
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and fossilized.
I see
And
what you're
these,
saying.
and
That's-
these bubbles have 30% oxygen in them.
That, I thought that was pretty interesting, so that it'd be more purified and you'd just be healthier.
Could you imagine?
Because sometimes we get on low oxygen.
And
so it
exactly,
is
if
so
you
well.
had air
Yeah.
pressure too, you've got a
Yeah.
hyperbaric chamber. It's like the Chiefs guys that have the knee injuries that are, they heal them by putting them in a pressure chamber. You'd be in that as well.
Wow,
This is
yeah,
after
that's
you put them
interesting.
back together.
You know, someone told me this morning that they had
That's my
volcanic
favorite fossil,
rocks,
you know.
and they were, kids were tossing them on the water,
Right.
but they wouldn't sink.
Wow, I wonder what they're made out of. They have a lot of air and
Well,
probably volcanic
Yeah,
maybe.
but she said they were volcanic.
Probably have a lot of oxygen. You know what that is? That's my best proof that there was a global flood. You know what it is?
Is it the lava?
It's corpolite. It's dinosaur poop. But it fossilized so fast, was buried so fast, even the dinosaur poop survived.
Oh, that's
I mean, that's even better than finding a dinosaur. And then, of
on
course,
a fish.
he's a fern from the Pennsylvania
fern.
mountains, and it looks just like the ferns you buy at Walmart. Nothing's changed, supposedly hundreds of million years. That coral is from Alaska, which tells you the water around Alaska was 73 degrees.
I know, I mean, if they were like the tropics all over.
Yeah, that's how it was.
Well, it's fun to get to see them up close.
Yeah.
If they,
Yeah, well, glad you guys came up.
More intelligent, but also, I've heard several times we are
I'm glad you're here.
And they would,
more complex.
I won't either.
More complex.
Yeah. Well, you've been kicking that around with everybody, 'cause that's the first time you've ever taken it. We are. That's a good question. We talked about what objective criteria would help us understand that. For example, brain size. And I got 200-ton dinosaurs with a brain the size of a walnut.
So you're referring to proportional size.
Yeah, when we've got, 3 pounds, I think the guy said, on average. So probably we've got more brain power. They were talking about chromosomes, but that's not necessarily, it's kind of what's built into the DNA that's important, I think. Because some animals, I heard, had 600 chromosomes in some animals.
thanks for
Only 36 or 38 with humans, so that's not a good factor, but that's a good question, and we kind of kick it around, I haven't got a definite answer yet.
we also went to press community,
Steve, who
but
sits
did
here,
it here a long time before they did it.
he and I actually had a discussion about that this morning. I think.
Oh, Dave Kenny?
No, Steve, he's in the blue shirt.
Bluequist.
No,
Oh, your husband, Steve.
he'll be
Oh,
right
yeah,
here.
yeah. He's a physics guy, he taught physics, right?
Yeah, and he had a really good answer for me this morning.
Okay, good,
So,
good. Well, I just want you to know that's a great question.
yeah, good. 'cause
And
I
when we
was-
don't know something, we kind of say, no, we don't know. I heard that a couple times already tonight. Not sure.
This is an unrelated question, but that video we just saw
Yeah.
with the subduction and all that, is there any way I can see that again online somewhere?
How can you start with one?
Dan is our video guy, he's cut that,
From some,
and you could probably find it somewhere on YouTube, but I don't know.
It's not possible.
does that look like it was worthy of further
Looking,
observation?
yeah, it takes a while, I mean, I've watched that probably 25 times, and still learning.
Yeah,
Basically, we're saying in the flood, those volcanic eruptions that were going on out of the ocean,
Absolutely pure.
they were causing these phenomena, and there were probably, I think you're gonna hear 10 or 15,000 volcanoes going off, all at the same time practically. So this is just pushing out over the land here, and the animals and stuff that are along the shores, they're gonna be the first to be hit and deposited. And so they'll be at the bottom, and then you'll see in another video, the big land animals, like some of the dinosaurs, and like humans, we went for high ground.
Yeah.
You know, and, that's why they find a lot of the dinosaurs buried, kind of up on plateaus and
Indoctrinated,
And,
So the waters of the Great Deep
but that's
are the waters of the ocean, not waters that are under the earth?
no, water's under the ocean.
Okay.
And, I'm not sure, because I'm not a science guy, I'm a business guy. I think I've heard, that's a good question to ask later, if we have time.
This one shared in our remembrance that.
I think they say that there may be
He has read or
2 or
heard
3 or 5
There's
times as much water under the ocean,
Adam,
inside the
perfect
Earth's
genetics,
ball.
and Christ.
It's not part of the ocean, it's underneath, that opened up and all of that came up.
Okay, at that time, there was 2 to 3 to 5 times.
Yeah,
How about at the present?
well, I think there's still the truth, I think, because it's cooler on the inside of the Earth than we thought it was, so. I think, that's a good, those are good questions, ask them later. I gotta look up something for a lady.
Did you get all this on tape? Or disc?
Yeah, it is on the website.
Yeah, well, yes. I've gotten used to it.
That's Frank Calvert's called back in 1972 did this for his church. It was all reel to reel tape back then.
Yeah,
He's got hundreds and hundreds of miles of tape. I bet you he beat you 3 to 1. Easy. When he graduated, he bought 3 or 4 tape. And some of the kids were going away to
All right, y'all, let's get this done so you guys can get home, but also enjoy what we can learn here. So did everybody that wanted a fossil get a fossil? Or at least one. Hopefully two or three, whatever you want. Okay, so everybody tell me if you have, does anybody have one of these gastropods, these sea snails? There's a few people, these guys. Okay. If you have one of those sea snails in that box, kind of pinkish usually. There, she's going to get one right now. Look for one of those sea snails in there. That gastropod, or sea snail, is from the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Now, I'm going to see if you guys can pick up on the 3 key things of why you're holding an apologetic weapon in your hand. It's supposed to be 500 million years old, found 1.1 miles above sea level. But it looks exactly the same today, and these animals live in the sea. What are 3 things that you can learn from this? Well, number 1, it's too late to ask you questions and expect you to answer intelligently right now, so I'm just going to give it to you. They're over a mile above sea level. What the heck is a sea creature doing on top of a mountain a mile above sea level? There's a problem with that if you're looking at the traditional geologic column. It's supposed to be 500 million years old, but yet they look exactly the same as they did then. They haven't changed. And they don't exist in the fossil record below that, so would they just kind of instantaneously evolve into a perfect creature and never change for 500 million years? There's a problem here, do you see it? Okay, so they look exactly the same. Yours are from Morocco, supposed to be 500 million years old. Problem, he's on top of a mountain and he looks the same as he did then. How about just a regular clam? Somebody get some of those? Yeah, you got some mollusks or clams. This is a Black Mountain, Kentucky, about a mile above sea level. It's supposed to be 550 million years old. He looks exactly the same as he did 500 million years ago. And the cool thing about most of your fossils, if you have clams in your hand, or a bivalve, there's another type you might have gotten too, it has kind of a crease in the center. Those are cool too. They're also the same area, but they're closed. So when you go to the seashore or along the river, do you find closed clams all the time? No, what do you find? Right, because they die, and they open up. When they die, the tendon gives way when they die, and so they pop open. The bivalve pops open. So you find them like this, or single shells. These poor guys were buried alive. They never had a chance to open up and die. That's how quick they were buried by these huge mud flows. What are they doing a mile above sea level? We're going to find out about that too. And if you were here when Kevin presented, he would say that these were just mountain clammers. The crinoids are the stem pieces that look like a stack of dimes or pennies or Indian beads. Right. That's this little part right here. This is the stem of a feather duster. And the ones that look kind of like a pinky or a finger that have little rings on them, that's probably more of your sea lily type. They have this extension and then they plume out from that. So, anybody have any crinoids? Any of those little stack of pinning looking things or a stem? Okay, if you do, that's one of these. 485 million years ago, found a mile above sea level. Looks exactly the same today in the ocean. Got a problem here. Houston, got a problem. How about royal ferns? You don't have any of these, but I have one up here. Just like Kimberly ferns you buy at Walmart. Exactly the same. Problem is, supposed to be 180 million years ago, they went extinct. The Carolina fern is a living fossil, which is, nobody believed they would even be found again. And we find them all over the place now. Another living fossil. another one miles above sea level. From the evolution presentation, if you're here for that, thousands and thousands and thousands of living fossils we found, and they all look exactly the same as they do in the fossil record. They haven't changed, and my goodness, what are these particular ones doing a mile above sea level? Like a snail, a sea snail, one of these types. Anybody get one of these snails? There you go. Hey, you see these in your garden, a land variety of these, but these bad boys are still alive today on the seashore. Madagascar, mile above sea level, 500 million years, never changed. Problem. This guy, ammonites. There were a few ammonites in the boxes, if you look for them. They look like a tight little snail. So they get like this big. But the problem we started finding was, well, you know what, in the Philippine Sea, we started catching these guys a few years ago, and we realized they're exactly the same when you cut them in half as the fossil record shows. A big problem we have is that they're supposed to be 65 million years ago, no ancestors, we thought they were gone. Jacques Cousteau is one of the first guys to actually see one of these in the Philippine Sea one night. He's like, oh my gosh, they're alive. Just, who remembers Jacques Cousteau? I do. I mean, okay, cool, I'm with family. Okay, what's he doing 2.5 miles above sea level in the Himalayas? What in the world is going on? And he looks exactly the same. Same chambers, everything. Got a problem. We also know that since they're above sea level that far, something put them up there. How did they get there? How do you explain that? Well, we know the continents separated, the mass, the land mass, the tectonic plates separated as we had this subducting seafloor, a lot of volcanoes going off, pushing everything out in all directions. Water levels rising, blowing out over the land masses. And we have these features that tell us what we see in Psalm 104, where we see this mountain word. He established the earth upon its foundation so that it will not totter forever and ever, and you covered it with the deep as with a garment. And the waters were standing above the mountains. Where'd you hear that? In Genesis, right? Check this out. This word, though, that's used. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they hurried away. And what happened? The mountains got pushed up, and the valleys sank down, and the water went back down to a place you established for it. If that's true, if you have pancake layers of sediments, and continents are running into each other and shoving mountains up into the air, you would expect to see sedimentary pancake layers of sandstones and limestones literally going vertical, wouldn't you? That's exactly what we see. You can't explain this with secular geology. You cannot explain vertical sedimentary layers with billions of years, especially when you take into consideration you're finding these fossils in the Himalayas in the fall at 5.5 miles above sea level. Sea creatures. Well, yeah, they got buried alive in the pancake. They got shoved up in the air 5 miles in. That's where they find them today. Duh, no surprise if you're a biblical creation person and believe the Bible and the flood narrative. If you are secular materialist, you have another problem. How did these animals get buried alive closed? They had to be buried fast, man. So, and then pushed up in the air, miles above sea level. What kind of an event would do that? Well, this kind of an event.
The fact that over a dozen states in the U.S. are filled with dinosaur fossils buried under heaps of mud also attests to the flood. In fact, geologists have found a temporarily exposed dinosaur peninsula, where the dinosaurs made their last stand, now buried there along with lake and sea life transported by the massive waves. The earlier flood deposits, the first 3 mega sequences, do not seem to have deposited much material over this dinosaur peninsula. Only a few hundred yards of sediment remain along the margins, and in many places, no deposition is left at all. Deposits thousands of feet thick occur east and west of this temporarily exposed peninsula that extends from Minnesota to New Mexico. Now buried across it are pre-flood wetland plants and animals, including dinosaurs, turtles, frogs, fish, and many birds. Thousands of dinosaur trackways up and down this peninsula, plus similar temporarily exposed low areas on other continents, suggest that dying dinosaurs and other hardy track makers floated, waded, and walked on freshly deposited mud, trying to find safe ground. Next, the massive Zuni megasequence hits. The Absaroka and Zuni megasequences are the most severe because the continental plates began to move more quickly from the original Pangea-like supercontinent configuration to where they are today. With oceanic rifting and plate subduction increasing dramatically and the continents traveling apart quickly, the tsunami-like waves began washing across western North America while virtually no sedimentation is occurring in the east. When coming up over the Dinosaur Peninsula, the Zuni catastrophically buries dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, a 13-state area encompassing over 700,000 square miles. This Jurassic unit includes at least 141 massive dinosaur boneyards, where dinosaurs like Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus are found. The Cretaceous layers, like the Hell Creek Formation, are found on top of the Jurassic and hold hundreds of mass boneyards containing several different types of dinosaurs, such as T-Rex, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Edmontosaurus that had been living in a different ecosystem, also buried by the Zuni. The Zuni was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mudflow, burying giant creatures like this T-Rex under 50 feet of muddy sediment, entombed so quickly that preserved blood cells, blood vessels, and bone cells were found just recently. How much water does it take to pile 50 feet of mud on top of a dinosaur? The Dinosaur National Monument in Utah contains thousands of visible bones from 11 kinds of dinosaurs that were buried in a jumbled mass in the Morrison Formation, together with crocodiles, turtles, lizards, frogs, and clams. What type of event would it take to bury all these different land animals with millions of clams? When the Dinosaur Peninsula floods over completely, large herds of dinosaurs are entombed in massive fossil graveyards in the Upper Cretaceous system found in northern Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. The dinosaurs had tried to escape by fleeing northward up the peninsula as waters advanced from the south. This explains this massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments, representing over 10,000 adult Maiasaura that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was found. Every one of these 10,000 Maiasaura was between 9 and 23 feet long. Does it seem like the adult dinosaurs were stampeding away from the raging floodwaters, with 100% of their young falling behind and being engulfed in a different part of the peninsula? Just 170 miles northeast of this location is one of the largest dinosaur graveyards in the world, one that even secular scientists admit was caused by a watery catastrophe. Here, thousands of centrosaurs are buried in 14 mega bone beds over an entire square mile, which is nearly 500 football fields. Looks like a massive herd of these creatures, thousands of them, were simultaneously buried in mud by Noah's flood. Just 45 miles west from this location is yet another massive flood deposit, and this one even has 49 different species of dinosaurs, buried along with turtles, crocodiles, fish, flying reptiles, birds, and small mammals. What type of disaster could bury nearly 50 species of dinosaurs and many other types of animals, including marine life, together in mass graves? These mass burial sites are common in the U.S. as well. For example, look at this dinosaur dig site in Wyoming, where a 1 meter thick layer of mudstone stretches for 80 acres, with over 1 million bones buried in a graded, sorted bed, where big bones are found at the bottom and little bones on top. The only way to develop a graded bed like this is by a catastrophic process that transports these bones and deposits them during a single event. Large flying creatures like pterosaurs were able to fly to escape the rising floodwaters, delaying their demise until the later stages of the flood. The fossil record shows they are buried in many different layers all over the world. There's no doubt that widespread volcanism was also involved in finishing off the dinosaurs, as many of these mass graves are literally packed with volcanic ash that in many cases was mixed with water when it emplaced the dinosaurs in their tombs. One section of the Morrison Formation, called the Brushy Basin Member, spreads across 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic materials. Without a single volcano in the Morrison Formation, geologists believe this material had to be carried all the way from volcanoes on the west coast, volcanoes created by the magma rising from the subducting ocean crust, plunging under the land. Today, these subduction zones form the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 90% of our earthquakes.
How many active volcanoes are there in the world today? Come on, there's a fossil on the line if somebody gets it right.
One in the water.
How many?
50.
50. Another guess?
1,000.
Another guess? There's 1,500 active volcanoes. We believe, geologists, secular and believers alike, believe that there were literally thousands of volcanoes going on. You know what that sets the stage for? What Dave's going to talk about next week, which is the Ice Age and why people cloistered together at the equators for something we call the Tower of Babel. They were getting away from this. But if you have thousands of volcanoes, thousands and thousands of them at large scale ones, all along the Ring of Fire, as we said, we have a lot of aerosols in the air, a lot of dust, and it blocks sunlight. It makes the upper hemispheres, or these hemispheres, a lot colder, the upper atmosphere a lot colder. So guess what happens as you have hot oceans after a flood and they start evaporating up into the air and they move across the continents as storms, and what do you think they fall as? A lot of snow. A lot of snow. Enough to create what we would call an ice age. And the flood is the best explanation for a flood, for an ice age. And it is because of the volcanic activity and the heat of the oceans. One thing I'll point out to you, how do we know the oceans were super warm? Well, because in Fossil Creek, Alaska, we find these big chunks of fossils. In Alaska or in Antarctica, 73-degree water you need for this. What's it doing there? Well, that's what it was like pre-flood, and even for a time after. But these volcanoes are going to give us a lot of answers. Let's look a little bit more about this, and then we'll get into kind of the closing here.
150th day of the flood, God made a wind to pass over the earth. The waters started to recede. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Now enters the final mega sequence, the Tejas. Here, after the water peaked over the top of the highest remnant of the pre-flood world, it began to rush off the continents, eroding and reworking some of the deposits laid down in the previous mega sequences, especially carving away at the Zuni deposits. This final sequence appears to have been different than the others because there was a reversal in flow direction as the waters began to sheet off the continents. This flow reversal transported much of the fossils deposited earlier off the highest uplands, spreading them towards the edges of the continent. The evidence points to the Tejas draining the floodwaters southward off of the U.S. towards the Gulf of Mexico, with a sheet wash pattern all at once. This is why we find massive sand deposits in the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico. Billions of barrels of oil have been discovered there, with much of it found within a massive 1,100-foot thick bed of pure sand in over 7,000 feet of water, over 200 miles offshore. In addition, plants swept off the pre-flood lands formed massive coal beds, such as in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. These Tejas layers contain the largest coal deposits in North America.
Now, hold on. 7,000 feet of water, 1,500 feet of sand in deposits, 200 miles offshore of the Gulf of Mexico. We're finding all the stuff that was on land blown off into the Gulf of Mexico. So think about the sequence of the flood. So you've got these huge 500-foot waves going across the continents. You've got animals being buried alive all over the place, and then you've got the retreating waters and the runoff from that. Well, the runoff from that is going, with the volcanic activity, is going to do two things. It's going to create some just really awesome canyons cut right through stacked layers of sand, sedimentary layers, with a lot of water and a lot of pressure pinned up in inshore in lakes and whatnot. So I did raise born here, raised in Arizona, and that lake structure, you can see where it was up in northern Arizona, up above and farther north, which would have held a bunch of water that was released at one time and pushed right through and made a Grand Canyon. You're going to see the evidence of that when we look at Mount St. Helens here in a minute. But it's crazy what it would have done. What struck me, there's two things that struck me about this, is when we read, and we'll see this perhaps in the video as well, I forget, but we'll see that God said, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the earth. So the retreating floodwaters, the humans that would have scrambled or survived, even in the most generous genetic terms, you would have had one person per 65 square miles of sediment if they would have survived or been a part of this fossil laying down. And the wash-off, the crushing of this, and the wash-off, the retreating phases of the water, blew this stuff 200 miles offshore, 7,000 feet deep in the Gulf of Mexico. You want to find remains of maybe, bones or something of a human? Go out there and look. I bet you we're going to find stuff like that if we were looking for that. The other component of this, which is fascinating to me, I'll save it for the very end, but there's a particular verse that shows God's mercy in this to Noah and his family. That is just, it struck me when I read it, it struck me when I heard other people talk about it, but I realize it's probably the most gracious verse in the flood account, and he says this in the 7th chapter. But I'll talk about that at the end. So hopefully who was alive for Mount St. Helens in 1980 and remembers like flour dust on your cars if you live, anywhere near it? Oh yeah, it was awesome, man. I mean, I was living in Arizona and we were like getting little bags of it together. Hey, it's not Mount St. Helens dust. It was like moon dust, So this is one volcano. You got Krakatoa and these other huge volcanoes that lower the Earth's temperature themselves by a degree or two. Just one, and we have thousands and thousands of them. This is how we're going to explain an ice age. It's easy with this volcanic activity. But let's just get an idea. It's kind of a miniature version of the kinds of things that was happening thousands of times around the globe during this flood event with all this volcanic and tectonic plate activity. So I'll speak to this. It's more or less kind of a documentary thing. But the first thing that happened as the plate shifted and as the volcano begins to erupt is these huge landslides as this displacement of the ground foundation under this area. And so what happens is these huge mudslides or landslides. And what do? They shear the trees off right at the roots. They just shred the trees, knock them right off their trunks, and trees get blown all the way out. And then they end up going off into mud flows of rivers, and they float down the rivers. So this is literally computer animation of what happened at Mount St. Helens based on what we see now. So we have all the trees being sheared off, leaving their roots behind. And we have an enormous amount of aerosols going into the air that actually is going to cool temperatures down. It's going to block sunlight. You want to stop global warming? Get those volcanoes going. That'll do it. That's what happened here. Okay, so let's look at the Grand Canyon. So I ran track in school. I ran for a guy named Jerry Jobski. He was a USC runner. He held several records. He was a great distance runner. And he brutally would take us and train us by running us in the crosspacks down into Grand Canyon and then back out again every year. And he held the record for running down and out, a mile down and out through those crosspacks. So I always wondered when I was looking at Grand Canyon, what are these fossils doing? At this time, I'm a secular evolutionary guy, president of the Science Club. And so I'm like, what are these squid fossils at the top of the canyon doing, looking like that? And then when you get to the bottom, they're down there too. if this is supposed to be like billions of years or whatever, how are the same fossils at the top and the bottom? The other thing that bothered me was like, you'd see a bunch of dead ones, and you ever, like a squid looks like they kind of have like a cone head on them, but you'd see them, sometimes they just look like circles because they got chopped off in the rock, and you'd see them long ways. But you'd see these things laid out, kind of going in a direction, all dead, going like this. You'd go about 20, 30 feet farther down running and look, and you'd see some of them going that way. And then you go up 50, 60 feet farther down, and you'd see a bunch of them dead going that way. And so it was like they were just getting sloshed around, like, or scrambling for their lives and getting caught. The water was flowing back and forth, as you see, as it was blowing through here. So I knew something was up with this whole deal before I was even a believer. So Steve Austin does a really good job comparing Mount St. Helens with Grand Canyon. So here's some evidence for it.
Most people have heard the theory that the Colorado River has been flowing through the canyon, eroding it very slowly over the period of tens of millions of years. That theory has been popular, but most geologists now have jumped that theory and are going to a different theory to explain the origin of Grand Canyon. There are many, many theories out there for how Grand Canyon was eroded, but most geologists are dissatisfied with the idea of the millions of years river. Geologists are speculating that Grand Canyon formed rapidly. There are various ways that it may have formed. For one I like is the idea that there was a great lake of water upstream from the Grand Canyon in the Hopi Desert area, and this lake drained through the plateau in northern Arizona. It breached a dam and drained through the area of the Grand Canyon, 270 miles long, an enormous spillway and drainage of lakes to the east and to the north. Grand Canyon may be explained by catastrophic process, and Mount St. Helens, with the breached dam and the mud flow that occurred, might be a good example. Grand Canyon could be a gigantic breached dam formed by rapid drainage of water from lakes. And it's illustrated by the landscape here at Mount St. Helens. We see at Mount St. Helens the landslide debris that was blocking the valley and the mud that overtopped and breached a dam, creating a spillway with a whole new series of canyons, even a miniature Grand Canyon. So Mount St. Helens provides a model for how Grand Canyon was eroded.
One of the other things that really bothered me at the time were the basalts that they got from Mount St. Helens, the volcanic rock. Some of it was being aged. They were sent out for lab and just to age it and to document what it was. And they all came back with like 300 million year old ages. These things were like 3 years old. Because, the technology that's used for that is just so randomly unreliable. It's almost never gotten any of those type of things right. Carbon dating is very limited in how far back you can go to be all that accurate. And the other problem you have when you're doing geology and you're trying to date samples is there's groundwater that's screwing everything up because it's carrying minerals and things in and out of the system. It's not a uniformitarian model where it stayed the same for, a million years. It just doesn't happen. So it's like you're adding sand to the, to the little egg timer all the time, or you push a bunch of water through and take a bunch of sand out and make it look younger. I will say this though, and I think this is probably pretty true. Because of the conditions pre-flood that we know, with way more oxygen, way more air pressure, way more moisture, we have such a different decay rate of what we're using to use as a dating method, so the carbon-14 method, for example. So you didn't have a decay rate that was that rapid. You didn't have as much of it anyway, because you wouldn't have had the same makeup of an atmosphere or carbon or nitrogen being bombarded with more gamma rays than we do today. It'd be much less. So I think you could find a sample of something and legitimately test it, look for carbon-14 and say, it's probably 20,000 years old. But the problem is, up until about 4,000 years ago, I would say, yeah, you're good to go. But before that, the entire atmosphere changed. Way more oxygen, there's way more, it's a completely different system. So obviously, you have a lot less carbon-14, so there you think it was way older. Because carbon-14 is really only good for dating like back about 5,600 years. But they have these systems, and they're like trying to measure little minute amounts of it, and they're finding it, and they're saying, well, I think we can justify that out to 90,000 years or 100,000 years. But the problem is, the system changed 4,000 years ago from our perspective. And even so, it's not billions of years. And it can't be, because diamonds have carbon-14 in it, the oldest things on Earth. Uh-oh, that's a major problem, right? So they leave that and say, well, we'll use an argon dating method. Well, that's extremely unreliable, and the system's changed so much in the last, prior to 4,000 years ago. We can't really rely on that. But here's the observational science. I mean, this is just common sense, right? This is what we see. We see sedimentary layers. We see sedimentary layers on both sides of our crushed coal, our crushed foliage that has been compressed down to these huge wide coal seams. Takes up to 1,000 feet of trees floating around, mashed down by great weight in water and sand to even pack it down to this density. And you have these sedimentary layers on both sides, and you don't see any erosion. You don't see any molehills or prairie dogs digging down in it or anything. They didn't have time. It was just laid down one after the other, after the other, after the other. No meteorites, nothing. The other thing you never find, this is an interesting point, you don't find roots in coal bed because these trees were sheared off. They were sheared off. Just like we witnessed in 1980 with Mount St. Helens. Great proof that this was a catastrophe, and it was a rapid deposit process that happened. By the way, some of this really wonderful coal that you get up in Michigan takes 40 feet of trees to every foot of coal. And some of those beds are 30, 40 feet high. Think about these huge mats of trees floating around that sheared off, and then a big mud flow or a big tsunami comes with mud in it and pushes it to the bottom and makes these things. Well, that sounds a lot more logical to me than waiting, millions and billions of years in a swamp and this just kind of happens with absolutely no erosion. No way, man. It's not even logical. So, here's our living fossils we've got problems with, and also some real fun pictures to look at. Look at this wonderful stack of pancakes of sedimentaries of sandstones and shale and limestone. And what in the world kind of pressure would take that and bend it like that? Well, it's easy to do if your pancakes are still soft. That's exactly what we see. These things were bent like so and not broken because they were laid down recently, and then these plates slamming into one another, pushing mountains up, Psalm 104, water running off into the valleys. Gee, that sounds familiar. That's in the Psalms. So, here we have, who's this guy? Coelacanth, the famous dinosaur fish, buried alongside T-Rex and all that. Unfortunately, he got extinct, started catching him in the 30s. Now we find him in the Indian Ocean, alive and well. They just live in particular temperature ranges, conditions. The cool thing about him is he was always touted by evolutionists as this is the one. He could get out on land and walk and become, a mammal over time. Here he is, coelacanth. Uh-oh, he's alive, and he looks the same as he did upwards of 170 million years ago. What's the problem here? He's still alive, never changed. Did a catastrophic thing happen all over the world? Yes, we find evidence of these like dolphin-like ichthyosaurs giving birth to little babies, little baby dolphins, and being buried alive by giving birth. That's pretty fast process. I don't know how long it takes to deliver a dolphin, but, you know, she was right in the middle of doing this, and boom, gone, done. 30%, even more so in a lot of samples, but at least in that range between 20 and 30% oxygen we see in these amber fossils, confirms we have a lot more vegetation, confirms the atmosphere is completely different. The deterioration process of different things we might use for dating systems is definitely different. It hasn't been the same the whole time. We have these fossils on top of the Himalayas. They look exactly the same today. They're still alive, but yet these are buried and they're above sea level at 5 miles above in these areas. But here's one of my favorites, a polystrate fossil. He's a big problem. So what happened in Mount St. Helens is these logs are floating around in a lake there, and they get waterlogged. What do you think happens to the tree trunks floating around in these lakes after this catastrophe? They get waterlogged, and what do you think the trees do? Yeah, and they sink. And so when they sink, they stab their way through a bunch of sedimentary layers, don't they? Well, you realize the problem. The problem is, and we'll see this at the very end when we close, but you've got a geologic column that shows this tree was alive and growing for 300 million years. That's a big problem. Well, again, you go offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, 200 miles, and go 7,000 feet down. You find all the sediments and sand that we see represented on land today. They got washed out of these valleys. This is a fascinating verse. It says, all flesh that moved on the earth perished. This is Genesis 7. Birds, cattle, beasts, every swarming thing, all these things on the earth, and all of mankind, of all that was on the dry land, and all whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. He blotted out these living things that lived on the face of the earth, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to the birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth. And only who was left? Noah, together with those that were with him on the ark, of course all the animals, and the water prevailed on the earth 150 days. And there, during this time between here and the 370th-ish day, we have all the runoff, we have all the sloshing around, we have the waters coming off. This is exactly what's recorded, what we would expect. So here's a conclusion. This is from a pure scientific perspective. We have the evidence of tectonic plates. It tells us that all our plates that we know of today fit together in one land mass, which is just what the Bible says. We separated the water from the dry land. We called this earth and this sea, and there you have it. What in the world are we saying here? We've got these millions of year old fossils, and they have blood cells and DNA and proteins and things that have survived in them in fossils. We have these animals that are eating, giving birth, and they're buried alive, perfectly preserved. There's a really nice nightshade fish over here. Guys ever see a minnow alongside the shore or something that's dead or whatever? No way do you preserve these fine bones. Even the oil of the fish is preserved in these. This is an anchovy. And he's in Wyoming. Well, there's another problem. What's he doing there in the mountains of Wyoming? But you might come and look at this. You know that there's no way that a raccoon wouldn't have come along, just ate him or something, or a bird would have ate him. But no, we have thousands and thousands, schools of these anchovies buried alive. Just like this guy. There was a fossil of a nightshade fish, a large one, eating another one that was in that fossil collection of that guy that had the estate sale builder. It was the professor in geology at KU. He had one. And he passed away, I guess, or moved to a home or something, and they were selling them all. I thought, my gosh, I would have loved to have gone to that estate sale. I wasn't around here. But it was just a few weeks ago. But here's your choice, right? Here's your choice. So, do you think trees grow without roots? Notice this. Trees grow without roots for 375 million years? Oh, okay. Right. Is it more like this type of a catastrophe we see on all these continents through these boreholes? Or do you think it took billions of years for all these fossils to deposit. You really have a conundrum here. It doesn't even make sense to follow secular logic in this. I mean, if you're a thinking person, you really have to have a lot more faith than any Christian or a person of faith to even consider how silly this is. But that's what we're faced with when we try and believe we went from goo to zoo to goo. So, fascinating, in the first century, here comes Peter, and even in his day, remember why they're attacking the flood? Because they're uniformitarianists, like I was. No, things have just gone on just like they always had. You're crazy. It takes billions of years to make a layer of sediments. No, it doesn't. In fact, here's what he says. They deliberately overlooked the fact. The heavens existed long ago. The earth was formed out of water. This is fascinating. And through water by the word of God. And by the means of these, the word of God in the water, the world that then existed, what happened to it? It got deluged and destroyed. They were doubting it here. The Gnostics and these other cats, they're all going, no, man, it couldn't happen. We don't see any evidence of that today. But he was dealing with this in the first century. What's new? There's nothing new under the sun. So, again, let's return to what Jesus said. So the days, he says and references this, as the days of Noah were, so shall be. This is the time in which the coming of the Son of Man will be. For as the days were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and carrying on, giving in marriage, till the day Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall it be, the coming of the Son of Man. What was the mark of the coming of Christ? What was the mark of the days of Noah? What was the world like? It was full of, the more violent this place gets, the more Hamas stuff going on, the more I'm going, whoa, dude, this is like what he's talking about. So, take it for what it is. To me, one of the most touching verses in the entire narrative of the flood is in the 7th chapter. And it's in the 16th verse. Does somebody have their Bible with them? Look, there's like 10 of you guys like scrambled and grabbed the Bible. That's so awesome. Okay. Who wants to read the 16th verse of the 7th chapter of Genesis for? Who's going to raise your hand? Who's going to be the one? Genesis 7, verse 16. I'm coming to you, whoever you are. We're gonna. Okay, here, he's going to read it for us. Here, take this mic and read that for us.
Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded them, and the Lord closed it in behind them.
Whoa. Did you hear what happened? You don't think Noah and his boys couldn't have closed the door, found a way, climb up in, jump through the window, whatever? No. Why did God close the door on the ark? For 100 years he was witnessing to his neighbors. They didn't want to hear, never heard of it, never heard of rain, don't want any part of it. They were living a life focused on themselves, carrying on in marriage, everything else. As if nothing was going to happen. They didn't want to hear it. And he could not have closed that door. I'm convinced if I hadn't closed the door on the world and said, no, only those in Christ are going to get saved, I couldn't do it. It has to be his work. And so it's fascinating to me that he drops this in and he says, so Noah and all the animals, everybody got in. And then he said, okay, I'm going to seal this thing. And there's going to come a time when he seals this world off from the opportunity to be saved. Jesus, there's many wonderful Bible studies and cool things to study about the ark, which is kind of a picturesque illustration of Christ, how it's covered with pitch inside and out. He's a covering. He's a salvation ark for us. But I tell you, there is a time when it runs out. So I don't know if anybody's here today doesn't know the Lord. I'm just telling you, man. You're kind of reaching this point of no return where the world is just going to get worse and then he comes back. Does anybody here believe it's actually getting better all the time? No, of course not, man. Not only because of the second law, but because the Bible says that's what's going to happen. It's going to get really bad. And then he comes back. And then it's really good. So I just want to encourage you, the hope you will hear about next week when Steve does that. Look at what kind of a gracious God we have, that he would save anyone, but he is saving his line to the Savior. It's coming through Noah, through David, to Jesus. It's coming. It's coming. And we can see around us the things that are happening that tell us that we're approaching this end.
Couple of questions, Dan.
Are there any questions?
No.
What did you find really interesting about the flood? Maybe you didn't know that. Is it encouragement to us to say, okay, do more of that? Was there anything that was interesting to you guys?
This was amazing. It was, the whole thing.
Thank you. The board and the whole team, we work hard on trying to find the latest content for you to look at. One of the coolest things that is not in this presentation but is coming is a dinosaur they just found recently, a Compsognathus. Anybody who's really into dinosaurs, they're the little guys that lived along the river banks and ran around, kind of like little miniature T-Rexes, if you want to think of them that way, feisty little guys. But they found a Compsognathus, and inside his stomach is what? A bird. You know what happened to the dinosaurs? They turned into birds. No, the problem is now they've got these Compsognathus that they found with birds in their stomach, and they were eating them. So they're probably post-flood Compsognathus. And obviously they didn't turn into birds because they were eating them. And Laura gave an example of a little raccoon guy that had a dinosaur in his stomach, so obviously, that doesn't work either. Every time you go to Dinosaur Monument or some of these other places in the world, you find possums alongside T-Rex and everything. Obviously, that's that whole evolutionary geological column thing. It just falls completely apart. Yes, sir.
I got a question. It's probably been 20 years ago, but I saw something about human artifacts that have been found like deep inside coal beds.
Oh, yeah.
Like a little doll or something.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't want to bring this up, but this is really a good point. So, okay, let's just say we're not believers. There's a big flood, and there's these big mats of logs floating around, right? 1,000 feet thick, some of them, because the way the size of the coal bed. So guess what? What do we do? Where are we going to go? We don't have an ark, right? So we're going to cling to what? A bunch of trees floating around, right? Just like the Titanic or something, right? So we're floating around on all these things, and then a 500-foot, at least, maybe 600-foot, tsunami wave full of sediments comes and smashes this down. And then another one smashes it down. And then another bed of trees comes along and gets smashed down. And you have these coal seams. So what happened to some of these people? You probably heated your house last year with some of these people. But here's how we know this is possible. In the coal seams, Virginia, Oklahoma are two good examples I know of, good examples, where they found these little idol things. They're kind of like little brass idol, looks like a bell, it's kind of like an idol. There's a couple different things that have been found, several actually. But they're like, what are these things doing in coal seams? I'll tell you what they were doing. They were hanging on to their idol with one hand and hanging on to the log on the other, and that was it. I mean, how else would this thing make it into a coal seam unless the person holding it went with it? So that's certainly possible. There's also some artifacts of, little bits and pieces of humans, like a finger found in Alaska, that has the bone and stuff in it. But I think the scripture's accurate. It is absolutely believable and inerrant, and it says, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the earth. So I think these retreating phases that we know happen just wash these people and artifacts, a lot of them, off into the ocean. And I would start, if I was really serious about looking for stuff, going out 200 miles and 7,000 feet down into those sediments that got blown off the continents here that are in the Gulf of Mexico, places like that. Other question? That's interesting. Yes?
No.
coolest thing that you learned? One thing. Popcorn. Just say it. What was cool?
All of it.
All of it.
It's hard to figure something in particular, it's so good.
Yeah, I'll tell you. The more I study this stuff and work with these guys who are really into the flood geology stuff, I'm learning that these new seabeds that are warm and pushing up are a lot of what caused the flood too. They're these subductions and this new seabed is warm and it's pushing up and it's pushing all the waters in, out and up and over the continents. That's going on while everything else is going on. That is part of the big equation.
Grand Canyon.
Grand Canyon, yeah, that obviously that's just water that flowed
I've
off.
always heard that, the Colorado River did that.
Oh, yeah, and if you know your topography, you'll actually know that the elevation today is higher at one end than at the other. It would have to flow uphill. That's another problem. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
I think it's interesting that an eruption of heat and lava and all that would cause a cooling. I
Yeah.
never thought of that before.
It's the opposite of what you would think. That's what we see today, like New Zealand and all of that. These volcanoes cause global, they cause cooling in these areas and across the whole globe. Thousands and thousands of them will do some pretty major stuff, enough to keep it cold and make it cold and keep it cold through summers for many in a row for that ice to drop and pack on glacier.
How about a round of applause for Dan? Next week, rounding out the preparation, we're going to talk about the Ice Age, the Tower, and the Hope. 3 short presentations in a sense, it takes most of the time. If you would, you might read Genesis chapter 11, which talks about the tower. And in the answers book, there's 4 questions that you can review that'll talk about the tower and what's going on, and a little bit about the Ice Age. In the Big Blue Book, there's a couple pages on this topic. And Dave, who will not present on the tower, I don't believe, but on the Ice Age, he look at his video on the Tower of Babel, so you'll get a couple different perspectives on the Tower of Babel. I want to thank you for coming. Next week is our last time together. It's hard to believe it to be over with. But I hope you're seeing how this all fits together. Chapters 1 through 11 fits together pretty nicely. God did it, so that's why it fits together. We'll see you next week. Drive safely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this outline that Ward put together is excellent. You can do a whole Bible study just following this outline. If you're doing, we've got a group that does Bible studies. Grab a couple of these and make some copies for yourself. It's really good. Your own personal devotional. It's a great outline.